Is technology being used to destroy the democratic process? That's our topic for the latest edition of E+T Off the Page. As ever, I'm joined by Jack Loughran. And today we also have Tanya Weaver, our latest member of the E+T editorial team. And I'm also delighted to have our special guest, Coral O'Connor. Coral is Senior Lecturer at City University London, and her specific area of research looks at how social media has altered the communication strategies of political parties. Her research investigates the use and impact of social media on party political communications and the changes that have occurred, looking specifically at the use of social media in general election campaigns. But more about social media later. I'm going to kick off by saying that we're not talking about the trust that we have in politicians as individuals, because we've all got our own opinions on that. Our conversation today is more aimed at the use of technology to set and upset the political process, and consequently, does the technology, or the way we use it, affect our trust in politics? And the backdrop, of course, is that we're in an election year. It's not just the UK, but around the world, because there are over 60 elections going on globally, and that accounts for about half the population of the world. They'll be voting for a new political leader this year. So I'll start with you, Jack, because through reporting on the subject for E+T, you've seen deepfake technology come along significantly in recent years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I just wanted to start by saying that actually I'm not sure, like deepfake technology is obviously really changing the game, but actually news channels have been, televised news has been broadcasting fake news for many years, probably since the start of televised news to some degree. I remember a few years ago clips of computer games being passed off as genuine war footage, and that. So I guess what I mean is, I think it's the editor's role in, say, a news capacity to determine what's real and what's fake, and I think deepfakery makes that judgment more difficult because there's a lot more fake footage circulating than there has been in the past. But also it's not a new phenomenon, and I'm hoping that maybe the sort of journalistic processes are robust enough to deal with deep fakes, even though I think they will have a bigger job on their hands than they may have had before. I think where the difficulty lies is in social media, where you don't have proper editors and proper people checking on sources and that kind of thing.
So I think you're absolutely right there. There's kind of two different issues there, isn't there? There is the news outlets themselves, and there is the technology and the changes we've seen in deepfake technology has been astronomical from what you're talking about in the like the gaming sector. The realism has got better and better. Now it has got to the point where you cannot tell apart what is real and what is fake to some extent.
Well, yeah, the pace of development is crazy. I mean, I remember about a year or two ago, there was these widely circulated videos, I don't know if you guys have seen them, of basically Will Smith eating spaghetti. I don't know if you've seen that. No. But it's basically Will Smith like funneling spaghetti into his mouth in all sorts of like slightly bizarre situations. And it was obviously fake. That like it was just clearly fake. It was and a few weeks ago, ChatGPT, or the OpenAI who are behind ChatGPT, they've released a new video AI generated video platform called Sora, and it's not available for like public consumption at the moment, but the examples of it that they've shown so far are almost indistinguishable, I'd say, from just recorded footage. So I think that pace of change between that Will Smith video and the Sora stuff, and we're talking like 2 years, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think politically as well, like if you look at Obama in the 2012 elections, there were a lot of fakes about him sort of like declaring one thing or not another. During the 2016 election, during Trump's time, I had my students in the classroom at the time, and like we were talking about, like we have to distinguish as journalists. We have to distinguish between what is real and what isn't all the time. Don't believe everything you read in the newspapers, because you were talking about the fact that, there are the gatekeepers on broadcast, but in social media there aren't. I would say that gatekeepers aren't even there in broadcast anymore. I think it's such a proliferation of content out there now that they can't keep up, really. I remember being asked, the Pope had said, when Trump was talking about kind of building a wall, I remember my students, and we talked about that story, and they were sort of saying, and I was saying, well, the Pope's come out and said, which is really, he hasn't endorsed them, because they were saying that he had endorsed, been endorsed by the Pope. And I said, no. What the Pope said was, you cannot break down, those that are building walls are not open enough. You cannot kind of resolve things for those that build walls. And then one of my students in the classroom said, oh, no, they've endorsed him now. And it was a fake story, but my students were not aware of that. And that was in the press and online. And that is the reality that we're dealing with now. There is a lot, these are legitimate sources that are online that are not being able to keep up with the disinformation that's out there. And I think that will continue.
So what counts, Coral, as a legitimate source online?
Well, that's for us as journalists. We are racking our brains to understand what we do with the technology that's there at the moment. And I don't want to kind of be doom and gloom, because at the end of the day, this content is out there. We just have to be more discerning as journalists, or anyone that's doing research. We have to be discerning as to what kind of content is real and what isn't. And we have to look at that, and we have to check, is the mouth moving? But we know now that the mouths move really, really well with the content, So we've always kind of tried to kind of battle against the fake, but the fake is getting so real now that it is actually problematic. I mean, recently there was the Keir Starmer, supposedly having an argument with his team, and that was fake too. So we are in the realm of, it's getting beyond. I think we have to trust in ourselves. I don't think we can trust in governments actually to say this is fake and this is real. I think we have to do that. And we just have to question. Even though my students said to me, oh, no, he's endorsed them now. I spoke to my students and said, are you sure? That was my first question, because it didn't feel right that he had been endorsed by, just the narrative of everything that the Pope has said before. I knew it wasn't real. And I think that's where we have to be a little bit mindful ourselves. We don't have the gatekeepers that we had. You put something on broadcast, it goes through the lawyers, it goes through, kind of 3 tiers before they decide to put something up on screen. I don't know if we have that same ability online. I think we're in a different world online, and that's what governments are grappling with.
I also think that ability to self-fact check, if you like, is becoming more and more difficult, because if you're actually watching somebody talk genuinely, whether it's Keir Starmer arguing, there was a similar one with Rishi Sunak recently, there was one in Ukraine where Zelensky said that the war was going to be over, or they were going to capitulate in the war, didn't they, after the first few months? And you can see these, and that particular one wasn't a very good fake, and you could tell that it was when you analysed it. And that was always the case. I think there was things like you could tell that their teeth were blocks of white rather than individual teeth, unusually jerky movements and things like that. That doesn't exist anymore. So you are now having to believe your own eyes as to what is actually true or not. And that is difficult these days.
But I also think the way we consume media means that actually people aren't going to fact check stuff. I mean, if you're scrolling through a TikTok feed, you see a video of Zelensky capitulating to Russia, and then you just swipe up, and there's a girl dancing to some song in her bedroom or whatever. Swipe up, it's something, Joe Biden saying something. You're not going to go to Google for every 10-second clip you see on TikTok and verify whether it's true or not.
But what I think. Sorry.
No.
But that's what I think we need to do as individuals, because like I say, there are no gatekeepers online anymore, that we kind of like, you'd watch a TV news program and that was gate kept, right? That it was edited in a particular way to stop us seeing the horror of the violence that occurred. There isn't that anymore. All the horror is available online if you want to see it. And so that means that I think young people, kids, need to understand what is real and what isn't online, and how you detect that and how you look at it. You did ask me, how do you do that? We're grappling with that right now. How do we know what's fake and what's not? We look at the URLs. There are things that we say to our journalists now. You need to be the fact checker as to whether that's real or not real. We actually have to say that to them, and we give them clues about, just check the URL, check that it's real, check where it's coming from. It says it's BBC. Check the logo, check the style, how it's kind of packaged. All of those things we say to our journalists now to check, but it's still a very difficult thing to do. But I think we have to learn that ourselves. I think we really have to. That's something that needs to happen in schools, and governments are grappling with this same issue too.
Is there no regulation at all on social media? Is Meta not doing anything about regulating or fact checking?
They will always say to you they're doing something, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say they're not right now. Okay, they've got a lot of deep pockets, more than I have. They always say they are doing something. How much and how quickly they can do it with the content that's coming up is always the problem.
But and equally, they are cutting back. Meta and X, their moderating team, they're cutting back and back and back, and there is such a volume, obviously, online that they cannot possibly keep pace with what is going on there.
And they also argue that it's that we are discerning as individuals. We can tell the difference. Well, we can if we if we've been understood how you make a story, how you put a story together, how you put that information out. Yes, you can. But if you aren't that person, I'm very skeptical of everything. So I have a 13-year-old child, and he's always doing exactly as you described, scrolling. And I am sitting there saying, and he'll tell me something. I go, is it real though? How do you know that's real? Have you checked that it's real? Well, it's here. And I'm going, but that doesn't mean it's real, So that's the battle that we're having. And I can ask those questions to my 13-year-old son. But is everyone asking those questions? And even asking those questions to themselves. We're all in our bubble, and we sit within our bubble online. And so therefore we think if they're saying it's real, So that's the argument.
No. I mean, I think you're right about the bubble. I think I'm much less likely to. I definitely say I'm on like the left of the political spectrum, and I'm probably less likely to internally debate the veracity of a left wing, something that supports my own political agenda, and something from the right. If something comes from the right, I'm going to have a much keener eye. So, does this sound right? And I might even look into it. If it's from the left, I probably just take it as read.
Isn't that the whole problem with social media, though? Is that with no gatekeeper at all, it fuels what people want to hear. There's no real debate. It can get into sort of slanging match or something, but there isn't really anything holding anybody back on saying what they want to. So they're talking to the already converted.
Yeah, I think governments are grappling with that now. I really do. And I do, like you asked the question, what protections are there on social media? What is Meta or any other organisation doing right now? And it's a really good question. And I think that they've been hauled in front of, committees to speak and tell us what they're doing about it. And they constantly tell us that they are doing something about it. But I think it's gone ahead of them even. I think it's like you say, they are, firing people at the moment. The moderations are, units are a lot smaller. And so if the moderation units are smaller and yet they're being accountable to government and they're saying, yeah, we're doing something about it, those two things cannot work together. It's too confusing.
And what about the tech companies themselves, like the OpenAI? Do they just want to get their technology out and they're not thinking about, what they call them, the guardrails around it? Like they just...
That's a really good question. And, they will always tell you that they're thinking about it all the time. I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure whether they're doing that, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. They will tell you always that they are, they're fighting the good fight, but we're seeing that the fight is not being won right now, and so I always ask myself the question: what does that mean? Do you then just say, okay, let's just see how this lands, or do you, as governments, pressure governments to do more? And, people that have had very horrifying experiences, online, have gone to governments constantly saying this technology needs to be reined in, just like the BBC 100 years ago was taken out of public ownership into, or private ownership into public ownership. That's not happened with social media. And it's a question I ask myself all the time, why, when it seems like it's all powerful, even more powerful than the BBC ever was in the 1920s.
But then if you took it into public ownership, doesn't it become even more dangerous? You have examples of allegedly the Russians interfering with the US elections, the one that Trump won in 2016, and allegedly that came from Putin himself. The power that Elon Musk now has is under debate in some circles as well. How much power do you want within one platform?
Yeah, I think Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter really shows that money does buy you power, actually. I mean, despite the fact that it's a loss-making operation at the moment, which, Musk is convinced that he'll be able to turn it around. We've yet to see any evidence of that. But, Musk commonly touts, he's a free speech advocate. But what does that really mean? Because, does free speech mean that you just allow anyone and anything to say anything they want on a social platform with no guardrails? Is that free speech? Because so in researching this topic ahead of the podcast, I did see a study from the University of Pennsylvania, which analysed 208 million US users of Facebook around the 2020 election in the US, and they looked at fake news and who was seeing the fake news on Facebook. And they found, it's a slightly unbelievable statistic actually, but that 97% of the fake news watched or read on Facebook in that election was read by Facebook users that leant to the right. And so if misinformation appears to be more predominantly right-wing, then advocating for free speech, you're inherently leaning to the right. So is that free?
That's one of the whole things about the whole deep fake and disinformation arguments is it lends itself to conspiracy theories. And what you just said there did lend itself slightly towards a conspiracy theory from a left-leaning person, perhaps.
Yeah, I think this trust that we have to have in social media and exist within it, which is we all do. I think you almost have to trust the Western liberal, kind of approach to democracy right now. That's all we have. And, and I do understand, there is this idea that, suppose the wrong people get hold of it. Well, maybe the wrong people already have hold of it. Mm. But you sort of think to yourself, will that wash? Will that come out in the wash? How long it will take, I think, is the problem. And until we have an understanding of that, then maybe we gatekeep it until we don't have to anymore, until we all are educated and understand.
But hasn't there been misinformation for a long time? How people have been, tweaking Photoshop images for ages. So what is it about AI and the technology that's coming up now that's just...
Like Stalin with hanging out with Lenin on that's going back to the 30s. So,
it's been around a long time, but what's happening now that everyone's just going...
I think everyone has it in their pocket. That's the difference.
And it can go viral.
It can go viral instantly, and everyone has it in their pocket. It's not the same as it was back then. It was coming through a funnel, if you like. It was one channel, one information that everybody had. I'm not sure that was a good thing to be said. I'm just going to throw that out there. Obviously, what's happened is we've democratized knowledge in if nothing else, with social media. But I think that's the thing. We have it in our pocket now, and no gatekeeper except you. That's the thing. No one to question except you, really. I don't want to be doom and gloom about this, because I actually think there is progress can happen, but I do think it has to come out in the wash.
And I think, and going back to the point that Jack started with actually about the mainstream media, is that we've known for a long time that there is left-leaning and right-leaning newspapers. But in this country, at least, and I don't know if the arguments hold in, for example, America, where we know that Fox is particularly right-leaning, Trump-supporting channel, and probably all the rest are a little bit more centrist than that. But we have, with ITV and BBC and Channel 4 News in this country, we do have those sort of gatekeepers. When we're talking about the actual technologies, as you were suggesting, Tanya, that when you're deciding when technology has manipulated the news, that being, the deep fake being different from disinformation, because that's as old as time itself, isn't it? Actually, politicians lying. There's nothing new in that, is there?
They lie.
But some tell the truth.
But if we do have those foundations, if you like, with the BBC and ITV, in terms of not actually putting on technological fake news, that is a starting point that we have. But unfortunately, perhaps, they're not above criticism themselves, those platforms, for one thing. And for another thing is that they are used a lot less as younger generations get their information through social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I saw some stats recently talking about where people get their news from, and obviously social media has just been increasing as the years go by. And I can't remember the exact stats, but I think it was something like 35% of people said their main platform was broadcast TV, and 33% was social media. So, I expect within a few years, the social media will actually become the predominant place where people get their news from, rather than traditional organisations like the BBC or whoever.
But we also have to remember that, those traditional organisations are also on social media now. So they are filtering through to the younger generation, if you want to call it that are using social media, because I think we're all using it no matter what age we are now, to be fair. So I do think there's a bit of pushback there, because I speak to my students in the class every day, and those are the things, what do you engage with? They don't formally sit down and watch half an hour of news, but they'll get clips, they'll subscribe to the BBC, ITV, Sky, Channel 4. They'll subscribe to those, and they will get the information that they need that way. But they're also getting a lot of not so gatekeepered, content as well. And they're having to be discerning about what they believe and what they don't believe. But, it's a very specific cohort, if you like, group of people. In other words, we're teaching them to be more discerning. It's all the others that we sort of question, and what they're looking at is also up for discussion. I know the BBC now, they have their verified hours, don't they? Where they, everything has to be meticulously researched before anything can go up on air. They've learned the lessons of just throwing things up and seeing what lands. Now it's about journalism, now is about investigations in more than it ever was before, and I think that's of interest to all of us, because at least then, if we are getting fed this content, at least in some way it's been verified.
Is that the case across the board, though? Because I increasingly get the impression it's less about investigation, more about agendas, really. You look at the front pages of the Mail and the Express, if I can pick those two out, then there is such a political agenda there that there is no investigation whatsoever.
But I think there always was. I think it was ever thus. I think we probably notice it more because we're online too. So it's kind of like, and we're more determined in our bubble than we ever were before. But I remember as a young person going past newspapers and it being very partisan. So nothing's changed in that regard. I think we just are more heightened to it because it doesn't agree with what we believe anymore. And I think that's even more heightened, even more problematic, I think.
I just wanted to talk about whether you thought COVID-19 was still having a kind of impact on this, because I feel like during COVID, people were stuck at home for months at a time, using the internet a lot. And at the same time, you saw a lot of kind of conspiracy theories spread online. I mean, obvious ones were 5G must cause COVID, which was a very significant conspiracy theory to the point where infrastructure was being destroyed. And obviously lots of stuff about the jabs and the jabs killing people more than COVID, and all these kinds of things. I just wonder if you think the pandemic has had a kind of lasting impact on misinformation.
I think it's had a lasting impact on social media use and internet use. I don't think the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going back there. We know how to use it. We understand it. We know what we want. We love our little clubs online, our little communities online. So I think that the genie's out of the bottle in that regard. I don't know. I mean, disinformation's there too. So we can't escape disinformation. But I think, I don't know, I feel a little bit optimistic. Should I be? I don't know. But
Really?
After all we've said.
I feel a little bit optimistic because I do think everything rolls to a different way eventually. And I think that we will get, not tired of social media, that's not going to happen, but we'll get more discerning in how we use it, what we understand. But I do believe that comes through education. So yes, I think you're right. Us being locked in our room, in our homes and our rooms for 2 years, add on and off, had an impact in how much we use social media, how much we discovered, what we discovered. Is it true that we discovered this? And people loved being in that community and questioning everything. But I think that's driven our society to be more knowledgeable. I'm going to use that in terms of as a positive. We are more knowledgeable through technology. We are stretching our own perceptions of what's right and what's wrong. And I think we're being challenged. And I think that's a good thing. I just, there are things that are legally dubious, I think, online that's not been tackled by governments and not really working to the best benefit of society as a whole right now. But I think governments are grappling with that situation. They are flailing around. They have no understanding, no way of doing this. That's my observation right now. But I don't think that will last. I think it's a case of working together collectively to understand what's going on online and making a difference. We have debates and counter debates and debates and counter debates in Parliament in the UK every single minute of every single day about the social media and online bill and what the changes are going to happen. And they're still grappling with that. Still not passed yet. Still waiting for it,
But in the meantime, we've got how many elections this year?
64 this year, I think, around the world.
And disinformation is going to be in every single one of them. And I think we have to understand that and work around it. I would say, seek out your knowledge, I would say to my students, oh, is that true? Can you double check that, triple check that then? It's always about just looking in deeper and deeper and deeper into story till you find the fake. We have stories that are on because my students work in a collective way in terms of how they produce content. And we have students that will use one credible source. I won't say which ones. We'll use one credible source and then I'll say, okay, can you just check that? I know it's credible. I know it's legitimate source, but can you check that? They'll use it. They'll go onto another site with another credible source and they will have two different information on there. So I'm like, you're going to have to do a third. Let's see if any of them are agreeing with each other before you then air it. And we're practicing, like in terms of live news programming. We're not doing it for real. So this is happening in real time in newsrooms because they're all working so fast, so quickly to process whatever content's coming in.
Some of that content, of course, is AI generated, and AI only generates what it's been trained on, and it can be generated trained on false disinformation to start with. So just checking and rechecking what you come up with. It doesn't mean that 2 out of 3 is going to be the right answer, does it? So that there has to be some of that context as well.
That's if the organisations are using AI to do their stories, which some are, by the way. That's if they're doing that. But if they're not, if they're legitimate journalists going out there, then they can do that cross-checking, and they do need to do that.
My concern, I think, is that we've kind of entered a phase where the idea of an objective truth is kind of going out the door, and basically, I mean, so AI has negative implications in the sense that it's capable of generating fake footage, fake audio and fake news that people believe. But I also think it can give people an out for things that are real, something that maybe disputes the way someone thinks politically or however. And actually you go, well, how do I know that's real? This thing that actually disputes what I believe, I assume is now made by AI, even if it isn't. So it's kind of got both of those.
So it's completely undermines the trust in the political system, if you like, because you can't believe anything.
Basically, yeah.
Which is kind of where we started. But in terms of the political process itself, if I can ask you specifically, Coral, because I know this is your area of research, is how political parties during election times are using social media, but to deliver their message, but also to communicate within their own parties. Is that right?
Yeah, so my research looks at how social media impacts the political communication within the parties, and I'm looking at the Labour and the Conservative Party at the moment, and I'm looking at the 2019 election, which was, as we all know, everybody calls the Brexit election. And I'm looking at how they communicated with the public, but also whether they followed the leader or not. Did they follow the leader? Were they congruent with the leader's policies? So we know traditionally they, kind of like let's park social media or Twitter, as I use social media. Twitter is the data that I'm looking at the moment. I'm looking at 52,000 tweets by 469 MPs, and I am looking at patterns. Are they following the leader or are they not? And my question
within their own parties,
and I'm looking. And my question is, are the people behind? Well, at the time it was Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn as the leaders for the 2019 election. Are the people behind there supportive of the leader that's in front of them? And I think that's not. I don't necessarily think I set out to do that. I think I was just very curious about how MPs use social media. I was really curious about how the US leaders use social media, to be honest, and that's where my original interests lie.
So are you looking at the impact of those tweets, or are you just using it as a data source to see how supportive they were of their parties?
I'm looking at it in this way. I'm saying that if they have their own social media, does that mean that they go it alone, that they're not following the leader? Because the leaders require their MPs to follow them. That's what they require them to do. So you go for an election and you want to know that the people that are going on the doorstep are interested in what the leader says, right? That's why you're there. You're going to knock on the door and you're going to say, I love my leader because of X or Y. He's the only one that can win this. And I'm saying he because there were both he's in the 2019 election. He's the only one that can win this. The other one can't, right? So that's what we expect. And that's I would say probably right. So you have your public broadcasts that come on BBC or ITV, and they show the leader and he's talking about why you should vote for them. You have the leaflets that are distributed to all the constituencies that then, like you put those through the letterbox. You have the newsletters that will come from the, kind of the HQ, the party HQ that go through. But what about social media? Because suddenly you don't have to be the one that's chosen to go on TV in your local area and support the leader. You might do that on TV, but what are you doing online? And do the political leaders know what you're doing online? So it's almost like peeping behind the curtain and just looking at what MPs are doing and whether they're actually supporting the leader or not. And that's the fascinating thing about my research.
So using Jack's conspiracy theory that the right wing are better at doing it than the left wing, and
this was a study from the University of Pennsylvania. Just putting it out.
All right. And we know what happened in the 2019 election. So are we saying, or are you looking at your results and concluding that social media did have some impact, and perhaps the Tory party used it better than the Labour Party at that time?
I think in previous elections, the Labour Party have used it better than the Tory party. So during Theresa May and Corbyn, which I initially started looking at the time, it definitely, Jeremy Corbyn used it a lot better. He was just good at, the team around him were good at communicating to young people to join the fraternity that is, the Labour Party at the time. So, but this time around, Boris Johnson, get Brexit done. I'm going to say to you, he tweeted about 900 times. I'm giving you a little bit of a preview of my research. But he tweeted "Get Brexit done." He tweeted across all policies, right, 900 and so times, and he tweeted about Brexit 48% of the time. Wow. 48%. Mm. I will say to you as well, little peek of my research. Not some MPs did not tweet it at all. And I think that...
Any notable...
You can read my thesis when it's complete at the end of this year. Yes, some notable, but moving on. So it's just quite interesting, I think, to look at, who's following and who isn't. And then when you go across and look at other policies, which I am doing, so, the traditional policies for the Conservative Party, which would be tax, which would be immigration. When you look at that, again, you see those that followed the leader and maybe tweeted a little, and those that... And I think it's fascinating because, like I say, outside of the online sphere, right, outside of that area, they are going into constituencies, speaking to people on doorstep and saying how great Boris is, right? But when they're online, there's a different story being told. And I think that's fascinating.
And do you think the political parties are looking at that sort of information as well and saying these are the ones who are towing the line and these are the ones who are a bit maverick?
I would love to say they are, but I'd love to know when they've got time for that. But I've got the thesis, so...
So your consultancy rates are very good.
Very, very high now. I think they would all love to know what's going on online. But parties don't have time for that. They definitely want to make sure that content is, kind of like following the leader. They absolutely want that. And maybe it's the area that they will look at a lot. I remember Nigel Farage in the 2015-16 election, referendum. I mean, one of the things he came out with, I think it was the 2015 election, had said, I realise now that social media is the way to go, and that is where I'm going to put all of my efforts. I remember him saying that, coming out into the public to broadcasters and saying, I understand how that works now. All of my effort is going to go into social media. He learnt very well a year later, with Brexit.
Very good. Well, looking forward to seeing your research when it comes out. Thank you ever so much, Carol, in particular. That's been fascinating talking to you today. If you want more information on Coral, you can look her up at City University. She's on the website there. Look up Coral James O'Connor. Thank you to Tanya and Jack, of course. If you'd like to contact us, there is more videos, podcasts and so on from the E+T team at entmagazine.com. And thank you all very much for listening.